and today I will be reading to you from Stars and Moonflowers in Our Garden by RainbowStar_772. That's me! Now, on to Chapter 10, Asleep by the Flowers. America smiled to himself as he walked around the small market. He'd seen a few things he'd be coming back for later, but for now he was looking for general snacks to give to Patience. He wouldn't let himself be a crow and collect shiny things yet. He could do that when he'd gotten what he required for his office. He needed to find the stalls with small, non-perishable foods, which were quite spread out to his dismay. He couldn't bring himself to mind it much. It kept him outside of his office for longer. Sure, his office was nice, but he liked being outside quite a bit more. It was freeing to him. It was perfect weather, really. The sky was slightly cloudy, meaning that the sun wasn't in his eyes at all times. It was a cool temperature today, but not too cold. It was the most comfortable type of weather for him. If it was colder, he wouldn't mind much, as he was a shifter for a more winter-faring cat species. He quite liked the current temperature, though. It was part of why he'd been so willing to settle and become a healer here. He reminded himself of why he was out here, at the market, and continued his search for foods that would help restore energy to his patients. He smiled at a sweet old lady who was selling dried fruit slices. He walked over to his stall and checked the prices she had written down on the sign. He happily ordered a good amount of them, exchanging the money he had on himself for enough dried fruit slices to keep him from coming out for at least another month. He actually got more than he usually would have, remembering what Samuel had told him before he left the castle grounds. He found himself hoping that the prince would like them. He shrugged off the thought with a, "If not, more for me and my patients." He walked to another stall and got some more sunflower seeds from the other vendors. The person was tall and had brown hair. They had a calm disposition and seemed sweet but standoffish. But he was here for sunflower seeds, not to analyze the vendors. He laughed softly to himself and bought the sunflower seeds before walking off to get more non-perishable snacks for his office. Luckily, the rest of the snacks he usually grabbed were easy to find. Of course, he got a couple new things that he found himself excited about, but those were few and far between. Once he collected the snacks for his office, he started going for medicinal herbs, so he'd start off with what he was out of first. He was out of the dried opium poppies, so he'd start there. He was going to be walking for that for a while. The market was large and very spread out. Luckily, he found some of the other herbs he needed during his wandering. Valerian, cloves, aloe, witch hazel, comfrey, ginger, and ground ivy. Once he got his hands on the dried opium poppies, he could start to look for a few amenities for his office that weren't a requirement, but were nice. He smiled, finally spotting the tan bulbs of the opium poppies. He ran over and quickly went through paying for some. He got the ones that looked like they'd do the best for his purposes and threw them into his bag gently after paying. He then bounced off, going around and picking up some general amenities for his office. He didn't pick up many, just grabbing a few books for the shelf. He knew no one really picked the books up from there, and it was only for him, but he didn't care. They were nice to have around. He didn't pick up books in medicine. These were for patients, so the genres were varied. He had some horror, some romance, and some that were science fiction. He got most of them from his book nerd of a sister, New Zealand, who was still traveling with their parents. The ones he got, like this, were few and far between, though he hoped they were just as good. He hummed to himself as he started to walk back to the castle. The walk was long, but not arduous. Rather, the walk was quite relaxing to him. He found himself smiling the whole time, and his thoughts kept drifting back to Neeks, a name he had no face to put to, or the prince, who seemed to like dropping into his office as of recent. As he left the forest, he noticed that the sun was starting to set. He'd been out for longer than he thought. He laughed a little to himself and jogged up quickly. On his way to his office, he noticed the prince was asleep next to the patch of chamomile flowers, leaning back on the castle wall. He paused and checked his pocket watch. It was 6:36. He could stay a little late if it meant that he got Prince Russia to rest somewhere that was more comfortable. "Hey," he said softly as he approached the sleeping prince. He really didn't want to startle him awake. Russia didn't wake at that. He seemed too peaceful to disturb, so America kneeled down and started to gently pick him up. Russia was a bit heavy, but he'd be able to manage. It kind of surprised him that the prince didn't wake up or shift when he did this. He shrugged it off and lightly carried Russia back into the castle. He hoped he might run into one of Russia's siblings so that he could get the sleeping prince to his room. Instead of running into one of the prince's siblings, he ran into his boss and the sleeping one's father, King Soviet. "Ah, hello," America greeted quietly, trying not to wake the sleeping prince. "I was hoping to get him to his room. He fell asleep out there." The king seemed to consider it, and then started to lead the way to Russia's room. "I take it your time at the market went well?" Soviet questioned, seeming to have decided to not tease America on his attraction to the prince. America would have bounced in place if he weren't trying not to wake the sleeping prince. "Yep, I got everything I needed," he said, smiling a little. "I'll probably be staying a little late today, so I can get everything out of my bag. I'll be putting it away tomorrow." Soviet nodded and stopped in front of a door, opening it. America went in and gently laid the prince on his bed, then dug into his bag, grabbing a piece of paper and his portable quill. He wrote out a small note and put it by the lamp on Russia's bedside table. He then left, bowing slightly to Soviet before he bounced off to his office. Once in his office, he unpacked everything he'd gotten at the market from his bag, leaving it on the coffee table he had in his office. Everything but a few books he'd picked up. He quickly moved those over to the shelf he had. He jogged back to his barracks, smiling sadly when he noticed that the sun was almost at the bottom of the sky. He got to his room, and his friends weren't outside, as he expected. They knew it was his day for visiting the market. He hummed to himself as he closed the door behind him, grabbing himself something a bit more befitting of his nightly activities. He changed out of his healing garb and into the new outfit. He jogged out of his room and towards the flowers. He slowly moved around, going from patch to patch, finding himself excited to see if Neeks had written a response. His excitement increased as he slowly got closer to the chamomile flowers. Once he got to them, he carefully went to tending to them. Once he was done, he excitedly pulled the envelope out that he'd noticed. He bounced a little as he opened it, reading through the letter. "Dear Aku, I must admit I was half expecting you to ignore my letter and just not respond. but I'm really, really glad you did. But I've met you in person before. I'd prefer to keep talking through letters, though. It's easier for me to communicate through. It's also very freeing to me. You know my actual name, but I think you would consider me as an acquaintance. That is, if I'm lucky. I'd like to see Bean, and I'd like to send you pictures of Anatoly, but I don't have a camera. I'll ask my dad on how to acquire a camera so I can give you a picture of Anatoly. Also, I'd join you in not sleeping if I could. When I eventually get the guts to tell you who I am, could I please get some of whatever your friend made? I want to be able to look up at the night sky without consequences to my sleep schedule. Or is that too much trouble? I'd very much like to not trouble you. Also, sorry, I hope that my question didn't make you uncomfortable. I crossed it out because I thought I may have crossed the line. Also, just so you know, I personally think you look very nice. You haven't reacted oddly to me either of the times we've met, but then again, you were in working hours. Out of pure curiosity, what do you think about Prince Russia? Also, I personally would have suplexed this Argentina girl. I'm surprised you are handling her. Excuse my language here for a moment. Bullshit so well. She sounds homophobic and bitchy, and I don't want to meet her. For curiosity's sake, what are you? From what I've seen, I'd guess angel, nymph, or fairy of some sort. I'd like to eventually meet up with you, but for now, I want to keep it to letters. Sincerely, Neeks. America giggled a little at the guesses and smiled. They were all wrong, but they were cute guesses. He didn't mind if they wanted to keep writing letters. It was cute and was fun for him as well. He hoped that it wasn't who he was that was making them nervous about meeting in person. And that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed. Anyway, I'd like to invite you to join the Discord, which is linked down in the description below. That being said, I hope you have a nice rest of your day, night, or whatever it is for you. Just enjoy your time, and I will see you tomorrow.